Check the baby monitor, sir. The little girl's whisper stopped the Mafia boss before he could take another step. At 2:07 in the morning, Alessandro Moretti stood inside the quietest room in his entire mansion, the nursery where his infant son slept beneath a soft blue blanket. For a man who controlled businesses, secrets, and people who feared his name, this room was supposed to be the one place where nothing could reach him. The lights were low. The house was silent. The only sound was the gentle breathing of his child. Then the small white baby monitor above the crib made a sound that did not belong. Alessandro slowly turned his head. The tiny red light on the device was glowing. He had not asked anyone to record anything. He had not called anyone into the nursery. Yet the machine was active. Before he could reach for it, a small voice came from the doorway. "Sir." Alessandro looked back and saw Mia Carter standing there in her worn pajamas, one hand holding the strap of her little backpack, the other holding her star-shaped hair clip. She was 6 years old, the daughter of Elena Carter, one of the women who cleaned and cared for his home. She was not supposed to be in this room alone. She was not supposed to interrupt him. But the fear in her eyes was not the fear of getting in trouble. It was the fear of knowing something important and not being believed. "What did you say?" Alessandro asked quietly. Mia looked at the baby monitor, not at him. "Check the baby monitor, sir." Her voice was barely louder than a whisper. "Why?" he asked. "Because it is not watching the baby anymore." The words stayed in the air. Alessandro stepped closer. He had heard thousands of accusations in his life. He had seen people lie to protect themselves. He had learned that fear often made people tell stories. But Mia was not trying to gain anything. She was not asking for money. She was not asking for a favor. She was pointing at a small machine above a crib and warning him about something she did not fully understand. "Mia," he said, lowering his voice. "What did you hear?" The little girl squeezed the star-shaped clip in her hand. "I don't know everything," she answered. "Honestly, I only know they were talking when they thought nobody could hear them." Alessandro looked toward the hallway. His security team was outside. His staff was nearby. His home had cameras, guards, and locked doors. Yet somehow, a 6-year-old girl had noticed something everyone else missed. He reached toward the monitor and pressed the playback button. Static filled the room for a moment. Then came the sound of a door closing. A few footsteps. Then a familiar voice. A voice Alessandro knew better than almost anyone. Victoria Valenti, his fiancée. The woman who smiled beside him at charity events. The woman who held his son's hand in front of cameras. The woman everyone believed would soon become the mother of his family. Alessandro froze. The recording was not clear enough to reveal everything, but one sentence cut through the silence. "After the evaluation, he won't be considered fit anymore." Alessandro's expression changed. Not anger. Not yet. Something colder. Confusion. Because those words were not about business. They were not about an enemy outside his world. They were about him. Behind him, Mia whispered, "I heard her say your name." Alessandro looked at the little girl again. For the first time that night, he did not see a maid's child standing in his nursery. He saw the only person who had noticed the crack in a perfect-looking picture. But before he could ask another question, the recording continued for one more second. A man's voice appeared in the background. Someone Alessandro did not recognize. "Once the papers are ready, everything changes." The baby monitor went silent. Alessandro stared at the small white device above his son's crib. A machine built to protect a child had become the doorway to a secret inside his own home. And standing beside him was a little girl nobody thought would ever be the person to uncover it. By sunrise, the entire mansion looked exactly the same. The marble floors were polished. The flowers in the entrance hall were perfectly arranged. The security team stood at their usual positions. Anyone walking through the front doors would have believed nothing unusual had happened during the night. But Alessandro Moretti knew better. Something inside his home had changed. He sat alone in his private office, the small white baby monitor resting on the desk in front of him. He had listened to the recording 3 times before morning. Each time, the same question returned. How had a device meant to watch over his son become something hidden from him? Before making any decision, Alessandro did what he always did when something felt wrong. He looked for facts. Not rumors. Not emotions. Facts. He called Victoria Valenti into the office. She arrived a few minutes later wearing the same calm expression she showed the world. She looked concerned but not afraid. "Alessandro, you look like you did not sleep," she said softly. "Is something wrong?" He watched her carefully. There was an issue with the baby monitor. For a brief moment, almost too quick to notice, her eyes moved toward the desk. Then she looked back at him. "The baby monitor?" she asked. "What kind of issue?" Alessandro noticed the reaction. It was small, a fraction of a second. Most people would have missed it. But Alessandro had built his entire life around noticing small things. "It was recording," he said. Victoria walked closer. "That is impossible. The system was checked last week." "By who?" he asked. She paused. "The security company, I assume." That answer bothered him. Victoria did not say she knew. She did not say she remembered. She said she assumed. A person who cared about every detail of his son's room would not usually make assumptions. Before Alessandro could ask another question, the nursery door opened. Elena Carter stood there with Mia beside her. Elena immediately looked nervous. "I am sorry, Mr. Moretti. Mia should not have come upstairs without asking." Alessandro looked at Mia. The little girl lowered her eyes, expecting trouble. He noticed something then. She was not acting like a child trying to get attention. She was acting like a child who was afraid that telling the truth would hurt someone. "Mia," Alessandro said. "Come here for a moment." Elena looked worried. "Sir, if she caused any problem." "She did not," Alessandro interrupted. It was the first time he had defended Mia before. Anyone accused her. Mia stepped closer. Alessandro opened the small notebook she carried. Inside were simple drawings made with colored pencils. A picture of the nursery. A picture of the crib. A picture of the baby monitor with a red dot beside it. "Why did you draw this?" he asked. Mia looked at the page. "Because it changed." "Changed how?" She pointed carefully. "The light was different. The first time I saw it, there was no red light. Then yesterday, it was there." Alessandro looked at the drawing again. It was not proof. Not enough. A child could misunderstand many things. But it was a detail that matched what he had seen. Victoria noticed the notebook and smiled gently. "Alessandro, she is sweet, but she is 6 years old. Children imagine things. We should not let a misunderstanding create problems in this family." Her words sounded reasonable. That was what made them dangerous. She was not attacking Mia. She was making Mia disappear. Alessandro looked at Victoria, then at the notebook, then back at the baby monitor. "You are right about one thing," he said. "She is 6 years old." He closed the notebook slowly. "Which means she has no reason to understand a plan. She only knows what she saw." Victoria became quiet. For the first time, the balance in the room shifted slightly. Alessandro still did not know if Mia had the whole truth. He was not ready to trust a child over the people closest to him. But he was ready to ask a different question. Not, "Why is Mia lying?" but, "Why is everyone so determined to prove she is wrong?" Later that morning, Alessandro returned to the nursery alone. He stood beneath the baby monitor and looked closer. The device was mounted correctly. The wires looked normal. Everything appeared perfect. Then he noticed something almost invisible. A small security sticker on the back had been replaced. The serial number was different from the one in his records. Someone had changed the device. And whoever did it wanted the change to look invisible. Alessandro picked up his phone and called his security director. "Find out who accessed this room in the last 30 days, he said. Then he looked at the tiny notebook Mia had left on his desk. A child had noticed the first crack. Now he needed to find out who had tried to hide it. The next morning, Alessandro Moretti did something almost no one in his world expected from him. He waited. For years, people had known Alessandro as a man who moved quickly. When a problem appeared, he solved it. When a question appeared, he demanded an answer. But this time, he did not rush. He knew the first person to react often revealed the most. So instead of confronting anyone, he watched. He watched Victoria walk through the mansion as if nothing had changed. He watched the new nanny prepare his son's breakfast. He watched the security team move through the halls, unaware that a small detail had already broken his trust. Then he returned to the nursery. The room was quiet again. The same soft curtains, the same wooden crib, the same white baby monitor hanging above it. But now Alessandro no longer saw a simple device. He saw a question. Who changed it and why? His security director arrived with the access records. Mr. Moretti, we reviewed the room activity from the last 30 days, he said. Only 3 people accessed the baby monitor system. Alessandro looked at the report. His own name was there. The security director's name was there. And the third name stopped him. Luca Ferraro, the technician who had installed the system. When did Luca access it? Alessandro asked. The director checked the record. 4 days ago, late evening. He claimed he was performing maintenance. Alessandro looked at the timestamp. 4 days ago was the same night Mia said she noticed the red light. A coincidence was possible. But Alessandro had learned that important things rarely happen by accident. He asked for Luca to be brought in. Not arrested. Not accused. Just questioned. When Luca arrived, he carried a small equipment case and wore the same professional smile he had worn every other time he entered the mansion. Mr. Moretti, I heard there was a problem with the monitor, Luca said. Alessandro pointed toward the device. You tell me, was there a problem? Luca stepped closer, looked at the machine, and immediately answered. No. Everything appears normal. Alessandro noticed something. Luca answered too quickly. You are certain? Alessandro asked. Yes, sir. Interesting, Alessandro replied. I did not tell you what part of the system was checked. Luca stopped for half a second. It was small, almost invisible, but it was there. Alessandro said nothing. He simply watched. Before Luca could respond, Mia entered the hallway carrying a small basket of folded towels with her mother. She stopped when she saw Luca. The little girl did not speak. She only looked at his hands. Alessandro noticed. Mia, do you know this man? He asked. Mia nodded slowly. He fixed the machine. Luca smiled politely. Children remember strange things. Mia looked uncomfortable. No, she whispered. I remember because he wore different gloves. Everyone became quiet. Luca looked confused. Elena gently touched Mia's shoulder. Mia, maybe you should not worry about things like that. But Alessandro raised his hand. Not to silence Elena, to stop everyone from dismissing Mia. What kind of gloves? He asked. Mia thought carefully. The first time they were blue. The second time they were black. Alessandro looked at Luca. A technician changing gloves was not suspicious by itself. But Mia had not said he changed gloves. She said he came back. That was the detail. Luca, Alessandro said calmly, did you perform maintenance here more than once? Luca looked toward the security director, then back at Alessandro. Only once. Another small answer. Another small mistake. Alessandro ended the conversation without accusation. He thanked Luca and allowed him to leave. But after the door closed, he turned to his security director. Check the service records. Not the reports. The actual system logs. A few hours later, the answer came back. Luca had accessed the baby monitor twice. The second visit was not recorded in the official maintenance report. Someone had removed it. Alessandro stood in his office, staring at the information on the screen. The first crack had become larger. The machine had been changed. The records had been changed. And someone had worked carefully to make sure no one noticed. Then his phone received a message from an unknown number. One sentence appeared on the screen. You should stop asking questions about the nursery. Alessandro read it twice. He did not feel fear. He felt something colder. Someone inside his own home knew exactly what he was doing. And they were watching him too. The message on Alessandro Moretti's phone stayed on the screen for only a few seconds before disappearing into the darkness of his office. You should stop asking questions about the nursery. Most people would have considered it a warning. Alessandro considered it information. Someone had confirmed what he already suspected. Someone was paying attention. The question was no longer whether something was wrong inside his home. The question was how deep it went. That afternoon, Alessandro made a decision. He would not confront Victoria. He would not call Luca. He would not reveal what he knew. Instead, he would create a test. A quiet test. One that would show him who was protecting the truth and who was protecting a lie. He called his security director into his office and gave one simple instruction. Change nothing. Let them believe we found nothing. The director looked surprised. Sir, are you certain? Alessandro looked at the baby monitor records on his screen. People reveal themselves when they think they are safe. The next morning, Alessandro acted like the previous days had never happened. He walked through the mansion normally. He greeted Victoria calmly. He sat beside his son during breakfast. He even allowed the same conversations to happen around him. But this time, he listened differently. Victoria noticed something was different. She smiled and asked, "You seem quieter today. Is everything all right?" Alessandro placed his coffee cup down. Just thinking about security. Her expression remained calm. Security? Yes. Sometimes people forget that small systems matter. Victoria gave a soft laugh. You worry about everything. It sounded like a caring comment. But Alessandro noticed something unusual. She did not ask what system he meant. She did not ask if there was a problem. She simply responded as if she already knew what he was talking about. Later that afternoon, Alessandro asked the security team to make a small adjustment. They would temporarily replace the baby monitor with another device that looked identical. The original would be kept safely away while the new one recorded access information. It was not a trap meant to hurt anyone. It was simply a way to learn who tried to control the room. The device was installed quietly. Then Alessandro waited. Hours passed. Nothing happened. For a moment, he wondered if he had been wrong. Maybe Mia had misunderstood. Maybe the strange details were unrelated. Then, just before midnight, the system sent an alert. Someone had attempted to access the new monitor. Alessandro looked at the information. The request came from a phone connected to the nursery system. He expected to see Luca's name. He expected to see an unknown technician. But the screen showed something else. Victoria Valenti. Alessandro did not move. He did not call anyone. He simply stared at the name. The woman he was planning to build a family with had just confirmed a connection she never admitted having. But there was still one question. Why? The next step was not anger. It was patience. Alessandro checked the access details. Victoria had not opened the camera feed. She had not checked the baby's room. She had accessed the settings. She was trying to change permissions. She was trying to control who could see and who could hear. Then another piece of information appeared. The access was not random. It was done using an account labeled Family Administrator. That account was supposed to belong only to Alessandro. Someone had copied his authorization. At that moment, the situation changed. This was no longer about a hidden recording. It was about someone quietly building a system where Alessandro would lose control over his own family. The next morning, Mia saw Alessandro standing outside the nursery. She looked up at him and asked, "Are you mad at me?" Alessandro looked down at the little girl. For the first time, his answer came without hesitation. "No, Mia. I am trying to understand why nobody listened to you sooner." Mia looked at the baby monitor and then back at him. "Because I am little," she said. The words were simple, but they stayed with him, because she was right. Everyone had looked at her age, her clothes, and her mother's job before they looked at what she had seen. Alessandro turned toward the nursery door. The machine had started as a small clue. Now it was revealing something much larger. Someone had tried to take control of the room where his son slept. And the person closest to him was the one who knew how to enter without being noticed. For the first time in years, Alessandro Moretti felt like a stranger inside his own home. He had spent his life building systems that prevented surprises. Every entrance was monitored. Every important decision was reviewed. Every person around him had a reason for being there. Yet somehow, a small white device above his son's crib had exposed the one thing he could never fully control: the people closest to him. Alessandro kept the information about Victoria's access to himself. He knew better than anyone that a secret was most valuable before the person hiding it knew it had been discovered. So he continued watching. He continued listening. And he waited. 2 days later, his security director entered his office carrying a small encrypted drive. "We recovered something from the original baby monitor," he said. Alessandro looked up. "Something that was deleted?" The director nodded. "Someone tried to remove the files, but they missed a backup folder hidden inside the system memory." Alessandro connected the drive. The screen filled with several audio files. Most were ordinary. A baby crying. A nanny speaking softly. Elena asking if her son needed anything. Normal moments. Family moments. Then they reached a file dated 3 weeks earlier. The room became quiet. Alessandro pressed the play. At first, there was only background noise. Then Victoria's voice appeared. "The evaluation needs to happen before the custody review." Alessandro's expression changed. He did not interrupt. He listened. Another voice answered. A man. Calm. Professional. "The report will show what we need it to show." Alessandro looked at the screen. He recognized the voice but could not place it. Victoria continued. "He will never agree to step away voluntarily." The man replied, "He does not have to. Once the court sees the concerns, the decision becomes easier." The recording ended. Alessandro sat completely still. The information was not enough to prove everything, but it changed the shape of the problem. Victoria was not trying to damage his business. She was not trying to create a public scandal. She was building a case against him as a father. The next morning, Alessandro asked his legal team to review every document connected to his son's future. Within hours, they found something unusual. A draft guardianship agreement had been created without his knowledge. It was not signed. It was not official. But it was prepared. Someone had already planned a future where Alessandro had less control over his own child. Then another discovery arrived. The name attached to the psychological evaluation was Dr. Marcus Bell. Alessandro knew that name. Years earlier, Marcus had helped his family during a difficult time. He was someone Alessandro trusted. Someone he believed was outside the politics of his world. Alessandro stared at the document for a long moment. The betrayal was not the money. It was not the plan. It was the realization that trust had been turned into a tool. Later that evening, Mia found Alessandro sitting alone near the nursery door. She stopped a few feet away. "You found something," she said quietly. Alessandro looked surprised. "How do you know?" Mia pointed at his face. "You look like my mom when she knows something bad but does not want anyone to worry." For the first time that day, Alessandro almost smiled. Almost. "Mia, do you know what you heard that night?" She shook her head. "No, sir. I just knew they were talking about your family like it was something they could move around." Those words stayed with him, because that was exactly what they were doing. They were treating his son, his family, and his future like pieces on a board. Alessandro looked at the baby monitor sitting on the shelf. It was no longer just evidence. It was a reminder. The smallest person in the house had noticed something everyone else ignored. Before Mia left, she turned back and asked, "Are you going to tell them you know?" Alessandro looked toward the hallway where Victoria's footsteps could be heard approaching. "Not yet," he answered. "Why?" Mia asked. Alessandro looked at the evidence on his desk. "Because sometimes people show you the truth when they think they are still hiding it." A few minutes later, Victoria entered the room with a calm smile. She had no idea that the man in front of her was no longer trying to discover whether there was a secret. He was preparing to discover everyone involved in it. For the first time in many years, Alessandro Moretti stopped looking at his enemies outside the mansion and started looking at the people already inside it. The evidence from the baby monitor had changed everything. What began as a strange recording in his son's nursery had become something much larger. Someone was not trying to take his business. Someone was not trying to challenge his position. Someone was trying to convince the world that he was not capable of protecting his own child. Alessandro spent the next 48 hours doing what he did best. He followed the information quietly. He asked questions without revealing what he knew. He reviewed documents without telling anyone why. And slowly a pattern began to appear. The guardianship agreement was only the beginning. There were emails between Victoria's legal team and a private consultant. There were appointment records connected to Dr. Marcus Bell. There were notes about Alessandro's schedule, his stress levels, and even small moments when he appeared tired after long business meetings. Someone had been collecting pieces of his life and arranging them into a story where he looked like a man who could not be trusted. The most disturbing part was not that someone was watching him. Alessandro was used to being watched. The disturbing part was that they were using ordinary moments to create a false picture. A late-night meeting became proof that he was never home. A serious conversation became proof that he was emotionally distant. A busy schedule became proof that he was an absent father. They were not attacking his strength. They were rewriting his weaknesses. That afternoon, Alessandro met with his independent legal advisor, someone who had never worked for his family before. The documents are carefully prepared, the advisor explained. Nothing here is obviously illegal yet. That is what makes it dangerous. They are creating a situation where everything looks reasonable. Alessandro looked at the papers spread across the table. Who benefits? He asked. The advisor pointed to the final page. Control of the child's trust account. Control of family decisions. Control of the future.
Alessandro stayed silent.
The answer was clear. Victoria did not want to destroy his life. She wanted to quietly own the most important parts of it. Later that evening, Elena Carter found Alessandro in the hallway near the nursery. She looked nervous. She rarely spoke to him unless necessary. "Mr. Moretti, there is something I should tell you," she said. Alessandro turned toward her. Elena held a small envelope in her hands. "Victoria asked me to sign this 2 weeks ago." Alessandro opened it carefully. Inside was a confidentiality agreement. It stated that Elena could not discuss anything she saw or heard inside the house. "Why did you not tell me?" Alessandro asked. Elena looked down. "Because people like me do not usually get believed in places like this." Her words were quiet, but they carried more weight than she realized. Alessandro had spent years surrounded by people who wanted something from him. Money, influence, protection. But Elena wanted none of those things. She only wanted to keep her job and protect her daughter. Then Mia appeared at the end of the hallway holding her little notebook. She looked at her mother and then at Alessandro. "Is Mom in trouble?" she asked. Elena immediately shook her head. "No, sweetheart." Alessandro looked at Mia. "Your mother did nothing wrong." Mia studied his face. "Then why do people make good people feel afraid?" Alessandro did not have an easy answer. Because the truth was that he had spent years living in a world where fear was often more powerful than honesty. That night, he reviewed the baby monitor files again. This time, he noticed something he had missed before. Hidden inside the audio metadata was a small note from the technician who edited the recordings. It was not a message. It was a name.
Luca Ferraro.
The technician was not just maintaining the system. He was helping control it. Alessandro leaned back in his chair. The circle was getting smaller.
Victoria.
Luca. Dr. Bell. The lawyer. People who had access. People who had trust. People who believed they could move pieces around without anyone noticing. But they had made one mistake. They underestimated the one person who had no reason to play their game. A 6-year-old girl who simply saw something wrong and said something. Alessandro closed the file and looked toward the nursery. Tomorrow, he would stop collecting answers quietly. Tomorrow, he would start finding out how many people had chosen the wrong side. For the first time in his life, Alessandro Moretti made a decision that felt almost impossible. He decided not to use his power. Not yet. The people who had built a plan against him expected a reaction. They expected anger. They expected him to confront Victoria, remove everyone involved, and make the problem disappear the way he had handled problems before. But this time was different. This was not a business conflict. This was not about territory or influence. This was about his son, and he needed the truth more than he needed control. So Alessandro changed the way he moved. He became quieter, more careful. He allowed Victoria to believe she still had the advantage. At breakfast, he acted normal. He listened as Victoria discussed future plans for the family. He watched as she smiled at their son and spoke about creating a stable home. To anyone else, she looked like the perfect partner. But Alessandro now noticed the details behind the performance. She never mentioned the baby monitor. She never asked if the security issue had been solved. She never asked why he had become interested in the nursery. She already knew. That afternoon, Alessandro arranged a private meeting with his security director and independent legal advisor. They reviewed every piece of evidence they had collected. The baby monitor records, the altered maintenance logs, the hidden audio files, the guardianship documents, the names connected to the plan. The picture became clearer, but Alessandro still needed one thing: proof that could stand outside his own word. He knew his reputation would make people suspicious. A mafia boss accusing his fiancée would sound like a personal conflict. He needed facts that could speak without him. The team discovered a series of messages between Luca Ferraro and an unknown account. The messages were not dramatic. They were careful, professional. That made them more dangerous. One message read, "The system update is complete. The access report has been cleaned." Another said, "The evaluation documents are ready for review." Alessandro looked at the screen. The plan was no longer hidden behind one person. It was a chain. Each person had handled one small piece, hoping no one would connect them. Then another discovery appeared. The account connected to the messages belonged to a company that provided consulting services for family disputes. A company secretly paid by Victoria. Alessandro leaned back in his chair. The evidence was growing, but so was the responsibility. He could destroy everyone involved with one phone call. He could make people afraid. But if he did that, the truth would disappear beneath his reputation. The people who ignored Mia would only say the same thing they always said: that powerful people solved problems with power. Alessandro looked at the small notebook Mia carried. It was sitting on the edge of his desk because she had left it there earlier. He opened it carefully. Inside were simple drawings. The nursery, the baby monitor, his son sleeping, a picture of Mia standing beside Elena. Nothing complicated, nothing strategic. Just a child recording what she saw because she believed someone needed to know. Later that evening, Alessandro found Mia sitting quietly in the kitchen while Elena prepared dinner. "Mia," he said, "do you remember why you told me about the monitor?" She looked up. "Because you looked happy with your baby." Alessandro was surprised by the answer. "What does that have to do with it?" Mia looked down at her hands. "Because people should not take away things that make someone happy." The sentence stayed with him. It was simple, but it reminded him what the entire fight was really about. Not ownership, not pride, not power, family. That night, Alessandro made his choice. He would not hide the evidence. He would not let fear decide the outcome. He would build a case strong enough that nobody could dismiss Mia, Elena, or the truth. Before leaving his office, he received one final piece of information. The custody hearing had been scheduled earlier than expected. Victoria had moved faster. She believed she was ready. Alessandro looked at the date on the document and then at the baby monitor sitting nearby. The person who had tried to control the story was about to enter the one place where stories had to face evidence. The next battle would not happen in the shadows. It would happen where every word would be recorded. The courtroom was not the kind of place Alessandro Moretti was used to entering. He was used to rooms where people lowered their voices when he walked in. He was used to decisions being made before meetings even started. But today was different. Today, he walked into a room where power meant nothing without proof. The custody hearing began quietly. Victoria Valenti arrived with her legal team, carrying carefully organized documents and the confidence of someone who believed the outcome was already decided. She looked calm. She looked prepared. She looked like the person everyone expected to trust. Alessandro noticed something important. She never looked worried. Not once. She believed the story she created was stronger than the truth. Her attorney presented the first argument. Alessandro was described as a powerful man with a demanding life, someone surrounded by security and responsibilities that could make it difficult to provide a stable environment for a child. The words sounded reasonable. That was what made them effective. They were not accusations filled with anger. They were carefully chosen statements designed to create doubt. Alessandro sat silently. He did not interrupt. He did not react. Because he understood something now. The plan was never to prove he was a bad person. The plan was to make people question him enough that they stopped seeing the father behind the reputation. Then Victoria's attorney introduced the psychological evaluation. A report suggesting concerns about Alessandro's ability to handle the responsibilities of raising his son. The document looked official. It had signatures. It had professional language. It looked complete. But Alessandro's attorney stood and asked for permission to present additional evidence. The first item placed before the court was not dramatic. It was a maintenance record from the nursery security system. The judge reviewed it carefully. The record showed unauthorized access to the baby monitor settings. Then came the access logs. Then the payment records connecting the technical changes to a company secretly funded by Victoria. The room became quieter with every document. Victoria's expression changed slightly. She had expected Alessandro to fight with emotion. She had not expected him to arrive with a timeline. A chain of facts. Complete picture. Then Alessandro's attorney presented the recovered audio file from the baby monitor. The room listened as Victoria's own voice filled the speakers. Not a private conversation taken out of context. Not a misunderstanding. A clear discussion about creating a situation where Alessandro would lose control of his role as a father. Victoria looked toward her attorney. For the first time, her confidence began to disappear. But Alessandro was not finished. He asked for one more person to speak. Elena Carter entered the room. She looked nervous. She was not dressed like the lawyers or the people who usually sat in places like this. She was wearing a simple outfit and holding her hands together tightly. The room saw a woman who had spent years working quietly in someone else's home. A woman many people would have ignored. Alessandro looked at her and said, "Tell them what happened." Elena explained the confidentiality agreement Victoria had asked her to sign. She explained how she was told not to discuss anything related to the nursery. She explained how she feared losing her job if she questioned anything. Then Mia was asked a simple question. She did not sit there like an adult witness. She did not try to explain things she did not understand. She only answered what she knew. "What did you see that night?" the judge asked. Mia looked at the baby monitor evidence on the table. "I saw the red light, and I heard people talking when the baby was sleeping." "Why did you tell Mr. Moretti?" the judge asked. Mia looked toward Alessandro. "Because I thought he should know." The answer was simple, but it changed the room. Because everyone understood something. Mia had not gained anything from speaking. She had only protected someone who could not protect himself yet. The final evidence came from the phone records between Victoria and the people involved in creating the false evaluation. The timeline connected everything. The altered device. The hidden recordings. The false documents. The plan to control the future of Alessandro's son. The judge looked over the evidence for a long moment before speaking. This court is not deciding based on wealth, reputation, or fear. It is deciding based on facts. Victoria looked down. The image she had carefully built was falling apart. Outside the courtroom, Alessandro stood beside Mia and Elena. He looked at the little girl who had been ignored because of her age and her position. "You know," he said quietly, "you were the first person who saw the truth." Mia looked up at him. "I just looked."
Alessandro nodded.
Exactly. Sometimes that is the hardest thing for people to do. For the first time, the truth was no longer hidden inside a small machine above a crib. It was standing in the open, where everyone had to see it. 3 weeks later, the Moretti mansion felt different. The same stone walls stood around the property. The same gates opened and closed every morning. The same rooms held the memories of years before. But something had changed. The silence inside the house was no longer the silence of fear. It was the silence of a family learning how to trust again. The court decision had been clear. Victoria Valenti lost control of the guardianship plan she had created. The false evaluation was removed from the record. The documents connected to the scheme were reviewed, and the people involved faced legal consequences based on the evidence they created. Themselves. There was no dramatic revenge. No one was forced to disappear. No one was punished because of Alessandro Moretti's reputation. The truth had been enough. That was the part Alessandro remembered most. For most of his life, he believed power was the only language people respected. He believed people listened because they were afraid not to. But in that courtroom, fear had not protected his family. A 6-year-old girl with a small notebook had. After everything ended, Alessandro made a decision that surprised everyone around him. He changed the way his company and household handled people who had less power. He created new protections for employees. He made sure workers could report concerns without fear of losing their jobs. He required independent reviews for decisions involving family security and personal staff. Some people questioned why a man with his influence would spend so much time fixing systems that had nothing to do with money. Alessandro had a simple answer. Because the people nobody listens to are usually the ones who notice what everyone else misses. Elena Carter was one of the first people to feel the difference. For years, she had walked through the mansion quietly. She cleaned rooms. She organized spaces. She worked hard and stayed invisible because she believed that was what people like her were expected to do. But after the hearing, Alessandro changed that. He did not treat her like someone who needed a reward. He treated her like someone whose voice mattered. He apologized for the fact that she had felt too afraid to speak. Elena told him she never expected anyone powerful to listen. Alessandro answered, "That was the problem. I should have listened sooner." Mia Carter continued being Mia. She still carried her small backpack. She still drew pictures in her notebook. She still asked simple questions that sometimes made adults stop and think. She did not become famous. She did not become a symbol in a way that changed who she was. She was still a little girl who liked coloring and sitting near her mother while dinner was being prepared. But inside the Moretti home, everyone knew something important. Mia was the person who noticed. The first crack when everyone else was looking at the perfect picture. One evening, Alessandro found her sitting near the nursery window, drawing. He looked at the page. It was not a picture of the baby monitor. It was a picture of the family. Elena was there. His son was there. Alessandro was there. And Mia had drawn herself standing nearby. "You changed the picture," he said. Mia looked up. "Before, you were always standing far away." Alessandro looked closer. She was right. In her earlier drawings, he had always been near the door. Watching. Working. Leaving. Now he was sitting beside them. "Why did you move me?" he asked. Mia shrugged. "Because you stayed." The answer was small, but Alessandro felt the meaning behind it. He had spent years building a life where nobody could reach him. Yet the thing he wanted most was something money could never create. A place where someone wanted him to stay. He looked at the old baby monitor sitting on a shelf nearby. He had kept it, not as a reminder of betrayal, but as a reminder to listen. "Do you know something, Mia?" he said. "That little machine changed everything." Mia smiled. "No, sir. I think listening changed everything." Alessandro looked at her and realized she was right. The machine only recorded sound. The courage came from the person who paid attention. Months earlier, Mia Carter was just a maid's daughter walking through a house where powerful people ignored her. Now she was the person who reminded everyone that truth does not need a title, money, or a position. Sometimes truth arrives quietly. Sometimes it speaks in a whisper. and sometimes the person brave enough to say it is the smallest person in the room.